Gordon Nesbitt from Millersville University in Pennsylvania. Just some logistical things. So if you would not mind staying mute. We have 4 panelists today. We'll be introducing ourselves and then telling what's going at our school. And then we'll open for questions. At the current time, if you would use the chat function. If you're not familiar, go down to the bottom of your screen and it should be a chat. If you could post questions there on the chat, then we'll get to them as we can. And we'll open it up for discussion about club sports and see how we're going. So again, I'm Gordon Nesbitt, Millersville, Pennsylvania, a school of 7,000, kind of a rural background. I'll pass it off to Amanda. Introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I am Amanda Bray. I am at Utah State University, and yeah, we are up and running with our facility. Is just open about 2 weeks now, but we are still in the midst of trying to do all of our return to play and reopening plans.
Great. Samantha?
Hi, I'm Samantha. I'm the sport club coordinator for Central Washington University. We have about 11,000. We are a small rural area, but we have a lot of commuters who come from the Seattle area and other major cities around us.
Excellent. Pete?
Hi, I'm Pete Vincent. I am at Temple University. I'm the Assistant Director of Programs at Temple University. Right now, our decision was to cancel all of sport clubs for the fall. So it's kind of where we are, and we're just working through a new plan of action for the fall.
Great, thanks, Pete. So at Millersville University, I came up with what I thought was a pretty decent plan for club sports competition in the fall. And I posted that to the chat, the discussion board on NIRSA, and then Meg contacted me to do this roundtable. And as probably a lot of you, your plans have changed. So since that happened, our conference, PSAC, one of the largest in Division II, decided no fall competitions. So since our varsity sports can't compete, and since we still have a travel ban on campus, we've decided no competitions for club sports. And now we're working on practices, whether they can actually have practices. We're following the varsity guidelines. They have maximum of 8 people in workout sessions. So we'll probably follow those guidelines. Amanda, why don't you tell us what's happening at Utah State?
Sure. So we have been given the approval to kind of do something similar to where we're going along the same lines of athletics, to where we are approved to have conditioning and training as well as skill set practices. But again, it has to be 10 or less participants at that time. We do have our athletic trainer working closely with our athletes. So they have the ATS medical system, to where there is a form they can fill out the morning of their practices that they're required to take their temperatures, assess their symptoms. So that way, if they're not feeling as well, if they have 100.4 temperature, they're not allowed to attend practices. But of course, she can check and see if they've completed that beforehand, and we'll have staff present to take temperatures at that location. Otherwise, all of our club members our clubs are required to submit a return to play plan. So if it's say for example, we just got women's hockey, so men's and women's hockey, they can have the same plan submitted. It's just each specific sport has to have a plan, and that includes their practices, equipment, facilities, home events, travel. We kind of put a shell together for them to think of all the logistics that they have to submit to our risk management department. And then once they have that finished and we've kind of reviewed it as a administrative staff, we will submit it to risk management for them to kind of make the final decision for us. So that way we're not saying, oh, well, cycling, they're pretty easy. They're outside, they're individualized, they're good to go. We're kind of taking it out of our hands and putting it in risks. But our university as well right now is essential travel only. So I'm not sure if this fall they'll be approved to travel. It's just a matter of whether we'll have home events.
Excellent. Samantha?
So back in May, we sent out that all clubs are banned from competitions for this fall. We normally start at the end of September, but our quarter actually got moved up to the beginning of September. That is due to the travel ban that is put in place. Last week, the GNAC canceled, so that just kind kind of confirmed that all competition will not be happening in the fall. One thing that our university is doing is they're actually doing a daily campus-wide health check-in. So you have to have that health check-in to be able to attend classes or enter any campus building. So that is what we are going to be using for our sport club check-in, health check-in, similar to what Amanda has happening at Utah State. So we have that happening. We're trying to figure out how we can keep our clubs as engaged and active as possible, but still following all the state guidelines. We're also in a 4-phase reopening plan for the state of Washington. Currently, we are in phase 3, which is supposed to allow up to 50 people in groups. But we had a recent spike this last week, so we are down to 10. So depending on what the state is saying for our county will determine how many people will be allowed to work out together in small groups during practices. So that's kind of the last little bit that we are waiting for from the state, which will determine probably in about a month to allow the clubs just a little bit of a heads up before they start.
And Pete, you kind of talked a little bit about Temple. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, so Temple as a city institution, a school, we decided to, on July 15th, we decided to cancel for all the fall sports. So we'll reevaluate in November/December to see where we are at that point. But as of now, we're not going to have any fall sports, any practices, anything along those lines.
Okay. So Pete, you've gone kind of the drastic approach, nothing. Amanda, you're actually allowing some competitions, but they have to go through a lot of paperwork. Are you helping with the paperwork, or are the clubs just doing that on their own?
So we, myself and our associate director put together that Excel sheet, and somebody did ask if I could send it. If anybody wants me to send it to you, just let me know. I can provide my email at the end of this. But basically, we have put it in their hands to create the return to play plan. Like I said, this includes their practices, basically stating like they're taking all their equipment home. They won't leave any personal items in any storage. Hockey, that's one that's difficult just because a lot of our players live together and they do have their own locker room at the rink. So we are working with them about coming to an agreement on what equipment they can leave at the locker room and what they need to take home, just to kind of still allow that space. But otherwise, we've pretty much told our clubs that, you know, we're here to help any way you can, but basically treat this as if whoever is reviewing this plan knows nothing about your sport. Be as specific as possible, include pictures, include diagrams and everything that you're doing, and as much information as possible, so that way you'd be able to hopefully get approved. But we also told them that in the plan to include a statement that says, even submitting this, I understand that we still may not be approved to have a season. So that's just one thing we're trying to be open and honest with our players.
Okay. Well, I didn't see any questions coming up, so I posted a couple. One at Millersville, I know Amanda talked about clubs or staff taking temperatures and things. I don't think we at Millersville have the financial backing to be able to supply staff to all the programs and thermometers. So I'm wondering if anybody else has some ideas about requiring temperatures or just letting the students self-police them. Man, did you have thermometers for your staff to use?
Yeah, so as a department, we ordered, I think, like 5 or 6 to use throughout the facility once we started to open the building. But our athletic trainer is purchasing 2 or 3 herself. And the good thing is that her or her athletic training aides are always present during practices and home events. So they're able to be out there, whether it's here at the ice rink or wherever, to take those temperatures. We've also sent examples to our presidents, so that way if they practice offsite, like our rodeo club, we said, hey, here's the best example that you would want to purchase if somebody is unable to take it at home. That way you can have it at the ring. It's the ones that hover and just kind of scan the forehead. So that way we give as many options as we can.
Okay. And yeah, we don't have athletic trainers at practices. We have to actually at Millersville contract out for trainers at games. So we wouldn't have that person. Amanda, I'm assuming you're using the forehead scan thermometers.
Yes, we are.
So that's nice to have an athletic trainer there. Pete, there's a question for you. Oh, sorry, Sam, you were going to say something?
No, I was going the same line you were. I was going to ask
Oh.
Pete about that question in the chat.
Yeah. So good thing is we also have our associate director on here as well. So he actually was able to provide some guidance for Jordan as well. But our facilities are planning to be open. Intramurals will be virtual. Classes are not 100% online. So we are working, like I don't know if I mentioned it, but our facilities are planning to be open. Some of our recreational spaces, such as our weight rooms and things. So they're working on providing social distances for those spaces and requirements to enter for those. So right now, as far as that's the only thing that we're offering.
Okay. And one of the questions I'm dealing with now is no travel. So does that, our bowling team, it's actually, Jay, I think, responded to it, but our bowling team is actually a social component and a competition component, and they travel about 10 minutes to a local bowling alley. So I'm struggling with, okay, is that considered travel? They get in a car, and since it's a student organization, they're students. How can I say, okay, bowling club, you can't go, and they just go as students and bowl? What do I do? We also have an equestrian club that they travel about 30 minutes. And if I allow those clubs, then our ice hockey club, they travel about 20 minutes to the ice rink. So that's kind of I haven't got an answer for that one yet. So if anybody has answers for that, I'd love to hear those as well.
So basically,
Oh,
sorry.
go ahead.
So what we've pretty much said for travel is that we require facial coverings anytime that they can't be within that 6-foot distance. If they live together, we do recommend that that group ride together. Another thing that we include in the return to play plan is that if they are riding together in the car, to try and have them be the same ones staying in the same hotel room for travel as well. So, I mean, they're still within the distance, but we're just trying to make it as little cross as possible.
Good point. And I think that was one of the guidelines. I'm trying to think where I got it. It's in my document, but the guideline was to try and have team members who live together travel together. Mm-hmm. So to minimize that contact with other people. So that's a good one. Intramural wise, we are looking at competitions. So right now our school is going to be on a hybrid model in the fall. We're skipping Labor Day, so we have classes on Labor Day where we usually don't have a fall break. We usually have, and then students will go home the Friday before Thanksgiving, so that hopefully they don't bring it back from Thanksgiving. So we're kind of planning some individual competitions where we can socially distance, and then esports.
In the chat, Jay has a good question. For those following athletics guidelines, are you under athletics? And how are you able to meet some of those guidelines if these teams don't have full-time coaches to enforce rules? So does anyone have any experience with that or similar situation that they would like to kind of throw out what they're doing at their school?
I know we're not under athletics at Millersville, but we are following their guidelines. For the most part, they are more strict, like the temperatures and meet with the athletic trainer. We can't do that, but the minimum of 8. So we're kind of following as much as close as possible to their guidelines.
Yeah, we're doing the same thing at Utah State. They're actually having their athletes get tested. I think like once a week or every other week is what they're talking about. But obviously we don't have the finances to do that. So that's why we're trying to work with the athletic trainer and her ATS online system just to kind of send reminders that before any practices or events or travel that they're assessing themselves from home.
A good question from Jonathan about best practices for non-affiliated volunteers. So all of our coaches are volunteers, but paid. Some of them are paid, but they're not paid through the university. Millersville is kind of a weird situation where the legal counsel does not allow student organizations to claim that they're Millersville University affiliated. They have to go by Millersville Rugby Club or Millersville Ice Hockey Club, but they receive money from the Student Government Association. So if anything ever comes up, my colleagues and I just go, it's like, yeah, you can't prove that. So as far as non-affiliated volunteers, they just have to follow the guidelines, social distancing for us. Haven't thought that one through yet. Good question. Anybody else have guidelines for coaches or volunteers?
We're requiring them to follow the same policies as our athletes. So doing the daily checks, wearing facial coverings when they come to work, any of the home events or practices. So we just make sure they are doing the exact same steps.
Comment from Jason James at Georgia. You're going club by club right now. Jason, would you unmute and just tell us about that a little bit?
The question was just asked if we were considering practices on a club-by-club basis or just a club sports basis. So as of right now, we're reviewing clubs to submit their return to practice request, and we're just going through them to determine if they're able to return to practice or kind of changes they'll need to make, different things like that, just based on a club-by-club basis.
So do you have guidelines that you're going to review so you can say, okay, yes, that is good, you can do it, or no, it doesn't?
We're just using the state guidelines and city guidelines for Athens, and then what we've asked them to also share if their NGBs have any return to play guidelines, share those with us so we can review those and try to get as much information as we can to be able to allow them to return to practice safely.
And you're in the wonderful state of Georgia where the governor is suing the city of Atlanta because they are requiring masks. That's awesome. And from Cindy, high risk sports. Yeah. Again, we're going with as much as we can. We'll have to figure out, like Jason is setting guidelines for each club. So for instance, the ice hockey club, their league suspended games for the fall and it's coming back in the spring, and they're wondering whether they want to practice or not. So we'll have to kind of go individual with those and just see how they can go there, how they can distance, and whether it's safe. Their head coach right now is a chiropractor, so he has medical experience. So we're going to rely on him to help us with that and figure out how to safely do things like that. They don't want to lose their ice time. The problem is if they practiced 11 p.m. Tuesdays and Thursdays, but if they don't have that time this semester, it may go to a men's league and they may not get it back. So that's another issue we're dealing with, is how do we keep that time slot for them? Anybody else? Specific time?
I was going to say, we have kind of a similar situation where our coach for ice hockey is looking to still possibly looking at how to keep that time slot, because they are one of the clubs that with us not competing may lose that time slot. So they're looking into ways to still use that time slot, still work with management to keep it for when they do start up. So that's a good point. With some of our clubs being off campus and on campus competing, there's some challenges.
We're really fortunate at Utah State that, I mean, with it being a small area, the rink we've formed a really good relationship with, and the community really supports the team. So our home games kind of help keep the rink open. So that's why they're very willing to be flexible with us and help keep our schedule. They try to keep the early mornings. So our hockey usually practices from like 6 to 7:30 in the morning. So the rink kind of knows to keep the early mornings open for our hockey practices. And then the games are usually 7 o'clock on a Friday, Saturday. So we've been very fortunate to have a good relationship with them.
I see here in the chat, there's a lot of talk about whether or not we have to wear masks during practices or not. I just think it'd be interesting to see if we could do a poll. I can't do it from my end, but how many clubs or how many schools are requiring folks to wear masks during practice, or if we are an exception for sports clubs. I know that's a very common question. We are being asked from the upper administration. So if anyone has an interesting way that they're handling that, I would like to hear how your school is handling that, specifically the masks.
And then there was just a comment to say to differentiate the difference between indoor and outdoor too, and whether they're needed.
I think the NCAA guidelines indicate that if they're practicing doing exercise, physical activity, they don't need to wear masks.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're sitting on the sidelines, they do. So that might be something you can use as, hey, look, NCAA says this, so why are we restricting students from that? I don't know if there's specific CDC guidelines on exercise. I know if you're outside and you're running, you don't necessarily need to wear a mask. Otherwise, they recommend that you do. I can't imagine. It's good. Go ahead, Amanda.
I think that's right, because we're doing the same thing for fitness. Like with our group exercise classes that we've had to make it smaller amount of people, but if they're doing the activity, then they don't have to necessarily wear the mask, because we've had it spaced out towards like 12 feet apart for everybody in a box. But if you are outdoors, they said the likely chances, if you're doing like conditioning drills or keeping that 6 feet distance, you're pretty much fine. But once you start coming in for like the team huddle or congregating, then that's when they require the masks.
So it looks like Florida International masks at all times, indoor and out. So that's something you have to address at your fitness center as well, like Amanda said with the fitness classes.
Here at Central, we are a school that is also requiring a mask at all times if you are on campus. And that will be part of our guidelines for coming into our recreation center as well, is that you have to have a mask on when entering the facility and continue to wear it while working out. So that's something that's come down from the state as well. So I'm not sure if, like Dr. Nesbitt says, whether or not CDC has specific guidelines or if there's any difference between NCAA and CDC.
And John Broska has a good point that at Millersville, we may not be able to provide supervision, so we're relying on the students to do it. Our rugby clubs, their practice field is basically on the front, almost the front door of the president's house. So if they're doing stuff, we know about it pretty quickly. That's a tough one for club sports to monitor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in our facility, they're required to wear it as they enter and moving throughout the facility. But once they're working out, they aren't required to have it on, because we were able to space out all of our equipment from 10 to 12 feet distance apart. And we've also closed down our track. We have equipment that's scattered throughout, so it's like an obstacle course.
I know that is also an issue that we're running into with indoor sport clubs, is that a lot of our facility is being set up similar to Utah State, where our weight room is now the weight room plus court A and B, because we're expanding it to make it as socially distant as possible so we don't have to shut down equipment in between use for so many days. So that's where we may come into the struggle of indoor versus outdoor club sports, because indoor sports literally may not have a place to practice this fall. So I know that's another issue that we're struggling with here at Central.
And we're doing a similar thing with our fitness center. We just inherited the fitness center. We weren't in charge of the fitness center until July 1st, so we're kind of scrambling to get that in place, but we're moving equipment onto gym floors and working with Pennsylvania colleagues. That seems to be the best practice, to limit the amount of gym space, so you limit the amount of people and spread out your weight equipment. And I saw Drew. Well, Drew was gone and back, but Drew has a question. Our school is going to require a log of practice participants for contact tracing purposes. That's a great idea if you can figure out how. We'll have to try and figure that one out with maybe the officers of the club. We just moving our club sports to IM leagues, so we may be able to trace them that way. Anybody else have thoughts about, Pete? No club sports, no worries. Other thoughts about contract tracing for practices?
At Central, we are actually launching the use of Presence, which is similar to OrgSync. So every practice will be an event within the system, because Presence actually has a COVID contact tracing element within it. So as they come to practice, they'll just scan their IDs. It'll log them at practice. And then that way, if we do have an incident, it will automatically be able to alert anyone who has been at specific events that the positive case was at, or I think it also does secondary contact as well. So that's something that we are actually working to implement, not only for organization general use, but specific to COVID. And then, as I said earlier, we're actually doing a campus-wide daily check and contact tracing. The system to be used hasn't been determined quite yet, but that's something that we're doing, and thankfully it's working out pretty well logistically from what we've tested anyway.
Yeah, we're talking about potentially at practices having people sign in and out. I know a couple people have mentioned that, just having like a sheet that they sign in. If they are coming into the ARC, what we have is Fusion, where people will either swipe their IDs or our staff will type in their A numbers, and that'll have them clocking in. And then we have them also swiping out, so that way we can see like the time frame of when they're in our facility, and then be able to check all the people that were in there at that time.
And Cindy has a good question about thoughts on enforcement protocol. At Millersville, we don't have the funds to have supervisors at each practice. So the only thing I can hold over them is money and practice time. And right now our money's up in the air because it's all tied to student fees. So we'll have to see what the student fees come in and whether they get any money whatsoever. So that kind of is out on that one, but it's just for us, it's kind of dealing with complaints as they come in. Like I said, rugby's in front of the president's house. So if I get word from the president that something's happened, then I have to come down on the club. Any other thoughts about making sure they're following the protocol?
I can add, that was part of what we looked at with our decision, having our student staff, almost to saying policing students. We just didn't feel like that would be the best way to go about it, especially having them maybe commuting in, taking public transportation, putting them in harm's way, kind of led into our decision. There was a lot of factors, but that was one of them that we did look at, what our students would have to try to do to make sure that people are following the different guidance that from the city, from the state, and things like that. So that was one of the things that kind of affected our decision.
Yeah, ours is kind of the same thing. It's budgetary. I've pretty much I ran into an issue with our men's soccer club. So their coach and presidency were constantly reaching out to me over the summer, just trying to see what they're allowed to do. And their coach called one night and just kind of said, hey, like, just trying to see where we're at. I have a scrimmage set up, like our little leagues are already having seasons and everything. So I just didn't know if we were on the same process, and just trying to explain to him the policies that were set by the university and the local CDC that we had to make sure we go by until we're approved by our risk management department to proceed. And I ran into the issue. Luckily, one of our staff members were still here, but they were trying to have a scrimmage on our ALF, which is right outside of our rec center. So at that point, pretty much emailed all of our presidencies, reminding them of our policies and the reason why we're stopped right now and what they have to do in order to move forward. But if I were to hear of anything that happened, or if I see anything that even if they had the approval to have a season, they would be on suspension and not allowed if they went against any policy set in place. And they also would not be able to have any funds for the semester. And I think that's kind of hit to heart and has helped.
Now, Pat has a question that institutions who haven't canceled club sports, you anticipate a goal to have 100%, 80%, 50% organizations in person. We are following the governor's guidelines, which change week to week, depending on where you're at. But right now, I think we're under 250 in a big, or 25% of capacity. So we are probably, again, we went with 8 people in a group. So we have an ultimate Frisbee club that has somewhere between 50 and 60 members, and they're going to submit a plan to us. So I'm okay if they can keep eight or so people in an area and have multiple pods, as long as we're meeting those social guidelines. I don't know if we haven't come up with a percentage. So, but we're going to try and limit the contact and enforce that those 8 people always, when they come to practice, they practice 4 nights a week, and keep those 8 people together for the contact tracing. So we know that if one gets sick, it's only 7 other people we got to contact rather than 50 people there.
Looking through the chat, I see, as Jay put it, it's the $1 million question right now, but does anyone, as we are having these limited guidelines and limited limits on practicing or even competing, what are some ways that schools are still working to keep the teams engaged, even if they have to cancel practices and events? So if anyone has a great idea, let's throw it out there so we can all benefit from that one.
Yeah, so we've actually been looking into this, right? So with the cancellation of our fall, we've been looking at ways to really engage our students and still keep them interested in sport clubs. So one of the things that we've kind of worked towards right now that's currently ongoing and will continue is some of our fitness challenges. So we've always kind of had this mindset of creating preseason for them and helping them do some workout routines and things like that. So we've put together a strength and cardio preseason for them. So right now they are alternating weeks, and they are doing either strength one week or cardio the other week. It's a 10-week program, so they'll have it up until the semester starts, and they'll just continue to go through and do that. So that's one of the ideas and things that we were able to implement during this time. We are going to continue with different fitness challenges, such as using the Strava app to promote them getting outside, being active, continuing that. We're also looking at a couple other things. So forming a committee with them to see about what type of things they want to do. One of the things that we don't want to do is just waste time in throwing out programs that we don't know if they're going to be interested in. So trying to form a committee with the students to really find out what they want during this time. What if they want us to continue the fitness program that we have out? If they want something completely different, maybe they're like, oh, well, we can't compete physically, Is there some other way that we can be engaged virtually? So that's just some of the ideas that we've started to work towards putting out for the students, but we're really at this time asking the students to be engaged and a part of the decision making for the fall.
Yeah, we've been pretty much doing the same thing. I've noticed a couple people mention that they're partnering with their fitness program. So we always try to do this find your fit opportunity with fitness. And I was working with our graduate assistant the other day and kind of came up with a find your fit bingo, to where not only our club athletes, but then also other students that are coming into our facility are doing this program, to where it's incorporating not only our fitness, but also all aspects of our department, where it's getting them involved with our outdoor program, getting involved with fitness, signing up for intramurals if that gets approved, depending on what that looks like. But it includes anything from going on a local hike, renting outdoor gear, going to the climbing wall, visiting the Arc, signing up for an intramurals event, doing online trivia, asking or meeting with a nutritionist coach or something along those lines. So that way we're kind of giving them different options to be a part of things on campus and still finding that community, but at the same time, like, we know it's hard if they're not having their sport.
And I just branched off of that. It's good to have plans for them to work out and stuff, but one of my fears is that we will lose clubs. If they're not able to practice, like our fencing club, we're going to have equipment where they normally practice. And martial arts club, that's a tough one. You can do some practices, but you do have, for contact, you have to be close. So I'm afraid some of those clubs will die out. So if anybody has ideas about how they can continue to promote themselves on campus and get students interested while not being able to practice or participate, I would love to hear them.
Something that our women's rugby coach came up with, and she's working with the men's coach, is that they're talking about potentially doing like a rugby class and training. So that way they're not only in person, but they can do classes through virtual video and just talking about proper techniques and talking about different skills. And then the next day or two, they would do it in person, but obviously not the ones that requires them to interact, but something along those lines. And I think that might be beneficial to where they're still learning about the sport, but at the same time being safe.
And one thing I am going to add is that we are still planning on doing officer trainings with them. I think some of the things that we normally do during the semester, sorry, my son, but normal things that we do during the semester, we're going to continue to do. So the educational piece will still be there. And I think that's a key component to kind of selling ourselves as sport club professionals or just professionals in general, is making sure that we are still educating the students and showing that we have a program that will really be able to kind of speak for itself, right? So we're still going to meet with them. We're still going to do the development pieces, but we want to just, I think what I was kind of looking at is how do we keep them engaged with knowing that they're not going to be physical, like doing their physical sport. And so that's kind of where we're at, but we're still going to be doing officer trainings, meeting with them, because I think as of now, their hopes is that they have a spring. So I think they're going to continue to be involved that way and engaged, knowing that's coming up.
Chris, there was a comment in here about doing some virtual community service projects. Do you have any service projects already lined up that maybe other clubs could do depending on what campus they're on? Because I think, as Pete just said, focusing on those other aspects of the sport clubs this fall is a great opportunity. So the leadership development, community service, those types of engagements.
Yeah, we don't have anything set up currently, but the things that in my mind we're looking at are things like making, spirit bags, for lack of a better term, for people in retirement communities, things like that. Also, as we get closer to the holiday season, the letter writing campaigns that take place for our servicemen and women overseas. So those were just two of the ideas that I came up with kind of at the top of my head. And I'm sure there's others that are out there.
No, those are great. Operation Gratitude is one that we've worked with in the past. So I think that's a great idea of how do we even continue to engage locally in our community, like you said, with the nursing homes or assisted living facilities. So I think that's a great idea.
For those that are allowing the community service project, what is the percentage that you are requiring for your club members in order to have it as an approved community service or volunteer opportunity? Because I know like on ours, we usually require at least 50% of the club to participate, but obviously for social distancing purposes, we're going to have to lower that amount. So I didn't know if you guys had already thought about or discussed that with your clubs as far as how many you we're going to require to attend, or if you're even going to have that as a requirement.
We've always required 25% of the club for community service points, so we'll stick with 25%.
At Central, we have such a huge difference where our tennis team can easily have over 60 people, but maybe one of our smaller clubs like Ultimate only has, 15 or 20. So the feedback that I had this year from clubs is that they didn't like percentages. They would rather just have to do total amount of hours. So that's something that we've looked into trying this year specifically because having those large groups of people may be difficult. We've also had a lot of requests from club officers to try and do as much online this year as possible. So having our officers meetings through Zoom, doing promotional videos through the social media, aspects like that, because they know they may struggle to keep active in the fall. So however they can do that and how we can help facilitate that online environment is what they've actually specifically asked for already. So.
On the chat mentioned videos, and my assistant has been contacting each of the clubs to make videos to post. We go with Get Involved for the student organizations, and our clubs are student organizations first, so they're going to be posting a lot of videos on Get Involved to hopefully attract students or get their interest. And Jonathan posted Engage, a virtual fair offering. That's a good thing. We were thinking about we have a student organization fair at Millersville at the beginning of the semester, and we were thinking of doing our own club sports fair, but doing that virtual, that interesting idea.
Yeah, similar to a lot of universities, I'm sure, but we have like your usual orientation week, or like we call it connections, where we would have all the incoming freshmen that are doing the orientation class come to our facility and do like a late night, but obviously for social distancing, we're not doing that this year. So we've been working with the admissions office, and we've divided it up into 3 separate nights in 1 week from 5 to 8 p.m. and only allowing basically what the government and local CDC has as the limit that can come through, and we'll offer different programmings that promote social distancing but still allow them to interact. And we require masks, and so we will have tables set up that the clubs can have throughout the ALF outside. So all of our programs are going to be outside as well. We're not having anything indoors. So that'll be an opportunity for them to recruit still.
As of now, our recruiting is still kind of being worked on. So more information to come about our recruiting process for our sport clubs. But at the moment, we're working with our assessment office just to kind of put all that together and figure out what the details will be for our clubs.
Another thing we're thinking about with club sports is we require them to complete an assumption of risk form. We've always had that, but now we're looking at adding something that mentions COVID-19. Is anybody else included COVID-19 wording in your assumption of risk, or whatever you call it, waivers or whatever?
At Central, all of ours have to be approved by the Attorney General for the state. And our last update to the waiver, which was just to make it digital, took almost 1.5 years. So we will not be adding specific wording about COVID-19. That may be something that the university does a blanket one across the board, but specific to recreation and sport clubs, we will not be adding anything.
I see Jonathan from Arkansas is waiting legal counsel. Yeah, I'm like Samantha. If I submit it now, I'll hear back maybe January if I'm lucky.
Yeah, we're working with our risk management to kind of create a separate form that is like an assumption of risk with COVID dialogue. We are including this on their on all the members' registration into Do Sports Easy. So we are just adding it as an additional form. And if we are approved to have any kind of home events, we're requiring the visiting teams to sign off on that as well.
I see a lot of people have added it. Some are waiting. If you wouldn't mind sharing the stuff that you've come up with, I would appreciate it.
Jay, you have a really good question about covering the costs of the additional equipment. Here at Central, we actually had a campus-wide committee that was formed that every department on campus submitted their list of what they needed. And if it was specific to COVID, the university actually is covering most of that specific cost to cleaning supplies and things like that. So that's one place where we do look out that it's not coming out of our budget specifically, but once those funds and those items run out, then it will come back to the department has to cover those costs.
And are you covering them or passing that on to the students?
That's something that I will be covering specifically for sport clubs. Anything that's safety related, I look out and I have a pretty healthy budget that I would rather them be safe, knowing that students may not choose safety over maybe buying cooler uniforms. So that's just where I want to make sure they're safe. So I'm going to get them the supplies that they need. And that's not just a COVID thing. We recently just updated it. So every club actually has their own first aid kit. Before there was only 3 that got passed around 19 clubs. So safety is something that falls back to the department to cover.
At Millersville, I've been promised, well, they actually promised the students that each student and faculty, staff, everybody will be issued 2 masks and that there'll be plentiful sanitization stations. So I still haven't received word from housekeeping how they're going to do that. And we need plexiglass in our fitness center. No word on that. So I'm not holding my breath that the university is going to come through with anything. We just got an announcement from the provost. The provost was supposed to be supplying video equipment for each classroom for asynchronous teaching so that students, some would be in the classroom and the others would be watching. And we just got an email saying, yeah, that's not going to happen. We don't have time. So I'm very skeptical whether Millersville University is going to be able to supply anything at this point. So unfortunately for us, it will come down to the student budget. It depends on how much money we get from Student Government Association.
Yeah, we're kind of the same as Samantha. We are very fortunate with the budget that we had and what we had running over. We were able to get the plexiglasses and cleaning supplies. Obviously, we're on back order with a lot of stuff, as a lot of people are. But the president of the university said that if we were ever running short or needed anything, we could always work with our facilities staff. So they have extra supplies on hand to give out to different departments if they are running low on certain things while they're waiting for stuff to be ordered in. We were also in student affairs, all the staff members were given 2 masks from their department that was paid for through them. On also our PDP department, which is basically who like creates all the marketing and publicity stuff and materials for the university. They were giving away masks that if you didn't have any prints put on them, they were free. But if you wanted to have a logo put on it, it was 50 cents per mask. So our department went in and got one mask for every professional staff, student staff, custodial staff. So that way they had at least another facial covering. We were able to open that up to our club sports as well. And since it's only 50 cents for the markings, it's very affordable. And so a lot of clubs have been taking advantage of that too.
I think on the other side of that one, the cleaning supplies are, yeah, that wasn't a big concern for us, but the added cost of travel, if you read some of the NGB requirements, you know, soccer, one ball per player, all that. So like all these additional costs that club participants would have to then provide. I mean, you know, we're looking at transportation ones where social or physical distancing on a bus. So a rugby club, which might take one bus now, needs 2 buses. And so that was, I think, one of our deciding things was we knew we weren't going to be able to cover all that, and we didn't want the students to have to figure out how to do that too.
For here at Central, that was one of our deciding factors to cancel as early as we did for travel because of not knowing how to fund that, knowing it would cost and having those buses. And for us to travel anywhere, it's a minimum of 2 hours. We're very isolated kind of in the valley that we're in. So that was a deciding factor to cancel as early because we didn't want to have to fund all that additional travel. Plus we didn't want to put it on our students. Thankfully the university still has the travel ban. So it's not that we are isolating sport clubs just because we don't have the funding for it necessarily, but.
Yeah, one thing to add, since so Pennsylvania did the phases, as many of you are aware of. So one of the things is the city still, for gyms, they're not open until August 1st. So we're still in this waiting to see about gym space, gym and recreational spaces as well. So that's kind of one of the things that we were looking at with our decision, but just a list of things that we came across to even kind of help our decision was facility space, financial resources, safety. Travel was a major key component, as Samantha said. Commuting to campus, being in the city, we have, like I said kind of earlier, we have a lot of students who use public transportation to get to the city, whether it's train, bus. So asking them to come on campus for competition just didn't seem safe. And kind of trying to figure out off-campus sports and facilities, knowing that a lot of our students would have to find places elsewhere to play.
Pete, can you add those into the chat just so people can see those as well?
Yes, I'll add them now.
Thank you.
Pete, it just dawned on me, are your classes all online or are you still having students on campus for classes?
So we have, that's a great question. So we have kind of a mixture. It's not all online. It is by department. So each department area is figuring out what they're going to offer. But the selection is kind of reduced more so than it has been before. So
it's 20% of the classes are on campus.
Okay, because we're at, I think, 55% are online, but that's also a concern. Are we bringing students to campus when they shouldn't be coming? They have all online classes, but we're hosting club sport practices. So are we drawing them to campus when we shouldn't be doing that? That's a good, something for everybody to think about. I see there was a question about dodgeball and cleaning equipment, and John doesn't want to be quoted as a doctor, but says there's guidelines. It's mostly through the air, but yeah, I think there's still guidelines that say you should be cleaning equipment as often as possible. Oh, and yeah, we're obviously following university guidelines too. So with the travel, they say no travel for anybody, so we can't travel with club sports. But we're looking at the governor first, and then the state system. So we're in the Pennsylvania state PASHE. So the state system second, then the university, and then going from there for guidelines.
Yep, and I know there's been a couple of comments saying that most of the governing bodies are waiting to hear from universities, and that's the truth, because most of them have said they've had contingency plans, because I know, I think, Gordon, you said that hockey, they've canceled their season, but here our director is talking about still having a season, which amazes me, but he said they have contingency plans set up, so I think that's pretty much across the board. All governing bodies have a season planned, but are waiting to see what each university is planning to do.
Right, and I got an email from baseball, and I'm trying to recollect our baseball club. They want to know by August 1st if we're going to commit to the spring. I was like, how do we know what's going to happen in the spring? But if we don't commit, we may not be able to get into the league in the spring. So there's a governing body.
You're still part of the NCBA, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, that's been a common theme, I think, through all of our discussions that I've had with people is there's been issues with the NCBA kind of trying to force people's hands across the board. So hopefully it's more isolated to baseball, but
yeah, I haven't had any problems with any of the other leagues so far. Fortunately, they have from the fall, they have from the spring, they have a credit from the spring. So at worst case, we just lose the credit if we commit.
Yeah, they had their contract that they sent that if you didn't sign it by a certain date, that if you joined, you couldn't get a refund or something along those lines. And I told my club presidency, I was like, I'll put it through risk management, but we can't promise it'll be hit within that deadline. So I would think that the governing body would be understanding. And then as soon as I sent that, he sent out another email stating that they had that timeline set in place for a reason. But I think it's very interesting that they're not being flexible with it.
Bonnie says NCBA needs us more than we need them. Don't cave to their demands. I'm guessing Bonnie's volunteering to create a new baseball league if we all get stuck. I wish.
So I do have a question. If you all have canceled seasons, are you all allowing your clubs to make certain purchases like on equipment or uniforms or anything along those lines? Or are you pretty much telling them they kind of have to hold off until we find out further information?
So the one thing that we're waiting for is to see how much money we get this semester from our GAF, our general activity fee. But as of now, we have suspended or frozen everything just until we have more information. And then if someone does want to buy something, they have to really provide a really good reason on why they need to. But we're hoping that with the spring, they'll be able to buy whatever they need before the season starts. So, but as of now, all accounts are frozen.
At Millersville, we're waiting too. We won't find out till probably mid-September what our budget is. But this past year, I was sitting on a big chunk of money from the Student Government Association waiting for purchases at the end of the semester. And then the virus hit and they froze all the funds and they actually took all that money back to refund student fees. So knowing what happened last year, as soon as I get that money, spend it, baby. Because other organizations and athletics spent all their money and they didn't have to give any back. So I was like, yeah, okay, that's not going to encourage me to hold my money till the end of the semester.
Yeah, we're in the same boat. So we're planning when we get it, we spend it. So.
Yeah.
I know it's just past 10 o'clock, so does anyone have any last questions or topics that they want to chat about real quick?
Well, great. Appreciate everybody coming on. 74 some participants. I know this is some big issues for everybody. I hope we helped. I know I got a lot of good information from this, and I'm sure it's being recorded, so I know it'll be posted. And I encourage you to use the, I don't know the term, the NIRSA discussion boards to post. That's where this all started from, because I posted our guidelines. Let's work together. Don't do it all yourself. So let's share. That's why I put my stuff up there. Is I'm more than happy to share stuff. I posted my email at the beginning, and I'll post it again here at the end, gnesbitt@millersville.edu. If you have questions or anything to share, I'd be more than happy to hear from you, because we're working through this. Like I said, 2 weeks ago, my plan was completely different than today. And who knows, I hate to say it, but I'm pretty much convinced that Millersville University is going to be remote and local. Pennsylvania numbers are going up, and I just don't see us being ready to open in full. So thanks for coming on. Keep the conversation going, and let's get everybody going for the fall. Stay safe, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.
See ya.